Hi everybody. So everybody last night asked me to do a video about how to put the binding on these little wall hangings, the Grateful Heart wall hanging. And so I'm going to do one of them tonight and video it for you. And this is going to be the one that I quilted. So I have prepared my binding, and you need a couple of strips of, widths of fabric, the strips of binding. I cut them 2 1/4 inches because I don't like a real wide binding. So I always use 2 1/4 inch binding on almost everything. And it works real well when you put this on with the sewing machine. So we're going to actually do this totally by machine. And if you want to do binding by machine, you want to put, if you're going to sew it on and then also flip it over and sew it on again with the machine, you're actually going to put this on the back. If you're going to hand stitch it down, then you're going to put it on the front. So that's how I do this. I always do this I'm going to sew this on the back, and then I'll show you how I do my little flip and the measuring and all that, and how to do get the ends done and everything. So and then we'll do the corners. So, okay, so I've already prepared my binding. I've got my 2 strips of binding. It's 2 1/4 inches, and I folded it. Sew it together with a diagonal seam in the middle there. You can kind of see my seam. And then I folded it in half. So it's all ready to go. So we're going to turn this over. So we're going to sew this on the back since I'm going to machine stitch this. And I want my junction to be on like a side that's nice and flat. So it could be on the top, but I think I'll just put it on the side over here. It doesn't really matter. You're not really going to notice it, but I have done a couple of these and they seem to work real well by doing them on the side. So I'm going to start and give myself a little room down here at the end and leave about 8 or 10 inches of binding here, so we have plenty to work with to do a turn when we go up the other side. And I'm going to start sewing then down towards the bottom, but I want to give myself a little room to sew before I get to this corner. So, all right. So I'm going to use my 1/4 inch piecing stitch. So let me go over here. I'm going to use the 1/4 inch piecing stitch on my machine. I'm going to go to the Q tab, and I'm going to go to Q02. And it moves my needle over to the right-hand position, and I can run my fabric right along the edge of my foot. Now, when I do binding, I like it to be pretty snug along the edge, so I usually use a full 1/4 inch seam when I do my binding, and that way it's nice and snug when I turn it to the front and it isn't loose. So we're going to go ahead and start. I'm going to start about maybe 3 or 4 inches above the bottom here, and put the foot down, and we're going to, hopefully I can work around my camera here. Put my needle down, and I'm going to go ahead and tie this in with I'm using a little button here. I like to use the tie-in button instead of using I don't usually use a tacking. I like the tie that ties the knot in place. Okay. So then we have to get down here, and we're going to stop about 1/4 inch from the end of this side. So I kind of know where to stop. I don't usually mark it, but I can kind of feel where that 1/4 inch is with my finger. You want to stop about 1/4 inch from the corner. Okay, and then I'm going to tie a knot there. Might be a little bit close, so we might have to clip, but we'll see. And then I'm going to cut it off. So that looks pretty good. That's about 1/4 inch. We're going to flip this over. And I'm going to bring this back. Now, this is not going to be quite a 45-degree angle. This is going to be kind of a short corner. So I'm going to flip this up at a 45-degree angle, but when I bring it down, it's going to be just a little shy of that because this is a more gentle angle on this particular lower corner. When we get up to the top, there'll be normal 45-degree angles. So if you can see here, I have the edge of I have just a little bit of an edge here because I don't have a complete 90-degree angle here. So, okay. So we're going to start on this corner. I'm going to drop my needle, and I'm going to sew in a stitch or so, and I'm going to tie a knot. And people were asking me last night how I got to this, when I get to the little point down here, where that little chevron was. This is a very gentle chevron, and I am going to put a pin there so I can see where my point actually is, and it's not much of a point, so I actually didn't really make a pointed end. It's very, very gentle. So I actually just kind of made a curve, and I just went around it because it was very gentle. We're going to go down here, and we're just going to continue to sew around. So I'm doing a 1/4 inch seam, and I like to do, like I said, I like to do a full 1/4 inch seam. I have that center mark down there with my pin, but we really don't have to do like a corner down here because it is so gentle. I mean, we can just go around the corner and it'll be fine. But I am going to kind of go down to where the pin is. Okay, and leave it there, and then I'm going to kind of start up the other side. So you can see I'm not making a corner there because it's so gentle. I've done some points like that you do actually have to make a point. You have to do a corner just like you normally do with any binding. So I'm going to come down here to the other corner, and I'm going to stop about a 1/4 inch, so I need to stop about right here. I can kind of see it with my, I'm going to tie a knot. And if you're just a little shy of the 1/4 inch, it's okay too. But you need to stop before you get to the end, about a 1/4 inch. So then I have a little end right there. Okay, this is going to look good. And again, I'm sewing this on the back of my wall hanging. And now when we do this one, we're going to start at about a 45-degree angle with the, and then we have to go up the side. So it is going to be just shy. You can see here, this is just shy of being flush with the outside edge. It's just because that's not quite, you know, a full angle or a full square corner. But it will look real nice when we, whoops, when we get it done. I think I might have lost it here. Just didn't hang on to it very tight. There we go. Then we're going to go to this side. And I'll tie a knot. Took a couple stitches, tie a knot. I'm going to pull this pin out of here before I stab myself with it. And then we're going to go up this side. Doesn't take long to get around these little wall hangings, so I want to do my full 1/4 inch seam. I'm sewing with a 2.5 millimeter length, and then this needle position, if you don't have this machine, most of the Brother machines are the same, but this is a piecing stitch. The Q02 is a piecing stitch, so it's at the 5.5 width, or the shift is what they call it. So it's over towards the right. Okay. Then when we get up here, again, remember, up here we're going to have to stop about a 1/4 inch away from the edge. And this one's going to be your standard corner. You know, this one's a standard full corner here. So there we go. I think that'll be good. We'll tie it off. And then we're also going to be catching our sleeve up in here. Cut it off. Let's see if I can get this a little bit closer for you. And then this one's going to be a regular standard corner. We're going to flip it, you know, 45 degrees and then lay it flat down. So this one is just a standard corner. The two at the bottom were a little on the shy side. Now this is going to be also where that sleeve is. So you're going to be sewing through an extra layer there. So I'm going to leave my pins in so something doesn't shift on me. Drop my needle. I'm going to tie a knot here at the end. Okay. And then get this lined up. And you notice that I don't pin my binding. I very rarely pin. The only time I pin is at the very end, and I'll show you how I pin it to put it together at the ends. Okay. Get this lined up. So be careful of this pin here. I am going to leave those pins in there for the sleeve so it doesn't scoot on me. Pull these back just a little bit too. And we're getting towards another corner here. Oops, second here. I'm getting stuck on. I haven't taken my embroidery unit off, so it's getting stuck on my embroidery unit. These aren't very big, so I can usually do them without taking it off. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there. I'm going to tie my knot. I'm about a 1/4 inch from the end. Cut it off. And we'll flip it around. Let's get these pins out of here. So we also got our sleeve up in there. That's good. So see, the sleeve is all in there as well. This is the sleeve that we'll hang it on our little hanger or on the little stand. And then I want to leave a pretty good sized opening here. So I'm probably going to stop around the corner just a few inches, maybe 3 or so inches around the corner, because I'm going to leave an opening here so it's easy to get it turned to do the end of the binding. So I'm going to do my 45°, and then I'm going to go straight down. I think a lot of you have done binding, but I think what you're interested in is how I did the sewing it on with the sewing machine. I have been doing this quite a bit with wall hangings and smaller pieces. I've even done it with quilts now because I do so many samples. It is much faster for me to do this by machine. And if I do a big quilt like as a gift, I often do, Judy likes to do hand stitching, so she often hand stitches them down for me. So we're just going to go down maybe kind of the end of the sleeve here, and then we're going to tie this off. So we have some room to work with the turning here. Okay. All right, so we're ready to do the turning. Now, I know a lot of people have trouble with this, so I'll show you how I do it. What I like to do is I like to fold this under like this, kind of fold. This is the piece that we just ended on, and I kind of just lay it down like this. And then I look at this piece. Now this piece I haven't taken my selvage off, so I'm going to go ahead and just trim this selvage off here. Forgot to do that, so we'll just trim this selvage off so we don't have that on there. And what you need to do is you need to overlap this the same width that the binding is. So remember, this was 2 1/4 inch binding. So I'm going to get my little ruler out here. I keep these little rulers in my drawer, and I'm going to find the end of my binding, which is right here. It's probably a little hard to see because it's dark binding. Okay, then I'm going to put this on my 2 1/4 inch line, and these need to overlap 2 1/4 inches. Make sure I got it on the right line here. I'm going to put my glasses on because it's kind of dark. I'm doing this in the evening, so of course it's the darker now. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put my 2 1/4 inch mark of my ruler, and I need to cut off this piece that we have laying underneath here. So I'm going to line that up, and I'm going to mark the underneath piece with my pin at 2 1/4 inches so that they are overlapping 2 1/4 inches. Okay, so there's where my pin is. I'm going to fold this back and make sure that it's nice and straight with the pin. I'm going to pull the pin out, and I'm going to cut this off. And the trick is you want to make sure that you're measuring carefully, and you want this to overlap the width of your binding. Now, if your binding is 2 1/2, then you would use the 2 1/2 inch marking. I don't use 2 1/2 inch binding hardly ever anymore. I like 2 1/4. Makes it snugger, and that looks real good. I'm remeasuring it just to make sure it looks good. Okay, so I have this really cool, and I think it's up on the group. A friend, one of my students years ago gave me this. I had never done binding before, and she gave me this little thing called Bind Aid. And I think I scanned it and put it up on the group. It's in Sew Along with Jan in the Dropbox, and it's called Bind Aid. This is how she taught me how to do binding. It actually works very well, and it's very easy. So what you do is you're going to take the left-hand side over here, and you're going to turn it down. So see how I have it turned down so that there's like a V over here, okay? Then you're going to take the right-hand side, and you're going to lay it open. And this has always been what people struggle with, is getting the binding right, okay? So then I'm going to lay this open flat, like this on this side, okay? Then I'm going to take this piece that I started over. I just turned it from here to here, okay? Then I'm going to continue with that turn and bring it up. So what I did is I have it turned over. I'm going to open it up. And sometimes it's easier to see if you open this up like this. Hopefully you can see this okay. I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to continue the turn so that the right-hand side, the right sides are together. And here on my right sides, I'm going to put the corners together. And there's a really good picture of this on that Bind Aid. So if you have not downloaded that, go download that and print it off, because there's a really good picture. This is how I learned. I had never done binding before when I got that, and I think it was Joni that gave it to me, and it really, really helped me to learn how to do this, because it had really good pictures, and my bindings always worked out really well, and I've never had any trouble getting these together. So you want to pin this. And I usually pin it in 3 places, in the corner and in the on the 2 sides, like that. And then what I do is I take, now this is a real dark fabric, so I have to find my white chalk marker. I like to mark where the corners are so I can see them a little bit easier than with them being underneath. So I'm going to mark this corner. And I can see this corner, but I'm still going to mark it because it's kind of a dark fabric. I'm going to mark the corner so I can eyeball this when I go to sew it, because I have to sew from here to here. Okay? So what I'm going to do that, get this out of our way, you have to kind of fold your wall hanging in half here so this lays nice and flat. This is the hardest part, and that's why you want plenty of space. That's why I leave a good opening so you have plenty of room for this to lay flat. And mine's still not quite laying flat. I'm going to go back over here, and I'm on Q02, which is my 1/4 inch. I need my needle to be in the center for a few minutes, so I'm going to go back to Q01, which puts it back in the center. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my laser light on, and you may not be able to see it because I have my laser lights part of my camera, but hopefully you'll be able to see it. So I just turned the laser light on. I want it to be in the center, which is where it is, and I just need the main one on. I don't need, there's some that are underneath on this machine too, but I just need the main one on. So I'm going to bring this over here. Hopefully you can see the red line. I think you can. And on the darker fabrics, it usually works pretty well. And the trick with this is to make sure your fabric is flat. So get your fabric flat. I'm going to bring my foot down, and I'm going to land right on that white mark that I made on that corner. I'm going to take a stitch in and just tie a knot there. Okay, and get this one all laid out and make sure that your fold is not stuck in this middle part here. And I'm going to, whoops, must not hit the fabric, so we better look at it again. I don't think I missed my fabric, so we're going to bring it back up here. Yep, I missed my fabric. There we go. Didn't have it quite under the needle. All right, get this laid nice and flat, and now with that laser light, I can aim right at this other corner over here to make it nice and straight. And I use my laser light almost all the time when I do binding. Anytime I do these diagonal lines, I don't have to, I used to draw the lines on, you know, and I'm just going to cut it. So I just ran that laser light right along there, and it's a nice straight line right here. Okay, and I even got onto my white little mark right here. Okay, so then, now if you don't want to cut this yet, I usually just trim mine, but this is how I test it. So I take all the pins out to make sure that you've got the right angle, and see, then it lays flat like that. Okay, so we need to trim this, of course. I'm going to trim this fabric out of here, and I just trim it at about 1/4 inch, as close as I can. Sometimes it's not super neat. Looks like I got an extra piece of thread in here, so we'll take that out. There we go. And then I'm going to open this up, the seam allowance up, and just finger press it like this. Okay, then we'll lay it flat, and then it lays nice and flat, and that's the rest of our, so we need to sew from here to here yet. Okay, now this is the only time that I pin my binding. I like to pin this so that things don't scoot around on me. So I'm going to turn it this direction, and I'm going to put up the first pin, you know, right where the start point was. So I know when I need to start and stop. Let me get this one, make sure my binding is flat here. Sometimes I have a little trouble getting it flat. There we go. I'm going to put a pin over here so we know where to start and stop. It's about right in here. And then I like to pin this. I don't know why, it seems like it works better for me if I have it attached here, because then it doesn't get wrinkly on me or pucker. But this has always been the hardest part of doing binding, I think, getting this last flip. And when I started using that bind aid, I really, really love those instructions, and they're very, very simple. So if you don't have it, go download it, because then you can really look at the pictures. The pictures are excellent. Okay, so now we need to get our 1/4 inch piecing stitch back. So I'm going to go back over to my machine. I won't show you this time, but I'm going to go back to Q02 and move the needle back over, and I'm going to turn off my laser light. I don't need my laser light on for this part. And second here, I got to get it turned off. There we go. There we go. My finger didn't work on the screen. So now I got I know where I'm going to start. I'm going to start about right here, tie a knot, maybe. Okay, and then we have to go down to the bottom here, close to the bottom, with our 1/4 inch seam. I think I've got a little bit of a scoot here, so I'll get it lined up. There we go. And I am going to slowly sew over those pins. These are those little magic pins, so they're very small and thin. And things don't scoot around on me. That's how I do like triangle type piecing too, like pinwheels and stuff, because if I take those pins out, they scoot every time. All right, so we're going to tie a knot here. Let me get the other end and cut off. So now I'll take these pins out. All right, so there is our binding. It is sewn on the back of my wall hanging. And the next step is going to be, I'm going to take this over to the iron, and I am going to iron this very flat. I want this to be, normally, you know, we always say we don't iron the binding out, but if you don't iron this, when you're doing this by machine, it will not lay flat, and it's very difficult to get a nice looking back. You'll miss the area that you're trying to zigzag on, and so I always iron this. So I'm going to take this over to my iron. I'm going to pause the video for a second, and I'm going to iron this out so you can see what it looks like when it's all done. So I'll pause the video for a minute. Okay, so I've gone over and I've pressed this on my pressing mat, and you can see this is the back, and see how I have my binding pressed with a nice crisp edge all the way around. Okay, so that's the first step, and you really need that nice crisp edge. Normally when you do this, when you sew your binding on the front and then you bring it around to the back and hand sew it, I don't normally press it because I don't want that crisp edge. But when we do it with the machine, if you don't have that, it's really hard to do the actual quilt, the actual zigzagging on the edge. So I've got this all pressed down nice and neat, and I'm going to turn this right side up. So the first thing I usually do when I do my corners, I'm going to start with the corners. And the first thing I like to do is I like to bring the binding around to the front and put a couple of these little clover clips in here. I actually don't clip most of the binding. I usually just do part of it. And we need to do the corners. And so this is the hard part, is to get your corners done. I finally figured out the best way to do the corners. Now, as you're sewing, you know, we're going to be sewing around this way and around this way. So the trick is to have the foot doesn't go over the corner unless it works its way down. So I want to start with this corner. I'm going to put this first corner, I'm going to put the right hand side of it, kind of push it up, and then I'm going to push the left hand side down. So when the foot goes, it's going to be going downhill over that edge. Because if you did it the other way, the foot will not go over it. Okay, it gets stuck. So I'm taking the right hand side of the binding, and I'm going to push this up to the corner, and I'm going to bring my left hand side down and make that beautiful 45-degree angle, like a mitered edge. And what I do is I take a pin And you can do the pins either way, but what usually works better for me, and I'm keeping the edge of my binding right on my 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, so I can see the thread. I don't know if you can see it in there. You can see the thread in there, and I want the edge of the binding right to the edge of that thread. And I like to stick the pin in the inside corner and move to the outside. That seems to work the best for me. And sometimes I have to do this a couple times to get it just right where I want it. But this is probably the hardest part of doing the binding, is you want these corners to look beautiful. And I finally am getting my corners so that they look pretty good. It's taken me a while to do this, and I kind of learned a couple of different things as I've been doing them. But the corners are the hardest thing for me. So I've got my corner done, so the right hand side is underneath the left hand side, okay? So I've got my 2 clips there, and then I'm going to move down to this other corner. We're going to do the same thing. I'm going to put a couple of these little clover clips in here. I love these things. They work great. And I'm going to bring the edge of the binding right up to the sewing line and put a clip over here. And then we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to take the right hand side and push it up first and bring the left hand side of the binding to the line and make my corner. Again, I'm going to take my pin, and I usually go in the center because that's where I'm wanting it. I want to leave these pins in. Just be careful not to stab yourself if you've got them sticking out, because they're real sharp. But that seems to work better for me to do that. And see that beautiful corner? Okay. This one's not as pretty, so we may go back and readjust this one. See, I don't really like this one. And let me go ahead and pull this up from the back and see if we can readjust this one. And we'll make it more beautiful. But this is the hardest. I think this is the hardest part about binding, is trying to get these corners to look beautiful. That looks better. But you have to take your time and pin them, and we are going to leave those pins in because that really helps. So that looks much better. So see that nice corner, mitered corner. Then we're going to go down here, and this one on the the center of this little chevron. It was such a gentle chevron. I think I'm just going to pin it. I'm just going to go ahead and put a couple of little clips on it, and we're going to be able to ease that fullness in. So I didn't put a little corner in the center. It was just so gentle that it's more of a curve at the bottom, but it looks just beautiful that way. And you can kind of see there'll be a little bit of a point there, but it's going to be pretty gentle. We'll go over to this next corner. So I always do the corners first, to do all the corners. And I'm going to go ahead and clip this with my clover clip and clip this side. So I clip on either side of the corner so that it kind of holds it down for me, kind of gets it anchored. And then I take the right hand side. Whoop, I got a little thread here. We're going to clip this. Get it out of the way. Got a couple threads, don't I? Okay, the right hand side, I'm going to roll that up with my thumb, and I'm putting it right down to the stitching line. And then I'm going to move this up and bring it down to the corner with the stitching line. Just a second, I got to get my thumb up there. That looks better. We'll grab our pin. We're going to put that pin in that intersection and bring it up to the side. And I think that one I need to readjust it just a little. And remember, this one's not a super square corner. This one's going to be a little bit less of a corner because it was the part of the chevron. Okay, put the pin in there and bring it up to the top. That looks better. Okay, so there's another corner. Got a couple threads in there we'll have to clip later. Okay, then I'm going to go up to this side, and we have one more corner to do, so I'm going to go up here to this corner. So I don't always clip the whole thing. I just clip the corners, and I'll put a couple of clips in, but I actually take them out before I get to them. So, and then again, the right hand side like this, and then you're going to push it up into the corner and bring it down to make that beautiful mitered corner in the corner. And it works real well if you just use your thumbnail and kind of hold it up there. That looks pretty good. Okay, see how, I let it loose, so we're going to have to give it another pin here. But the trick is to put the left-hand side on top, because when the foot goes over, you're not going to be going against that corner then. Because when I first started doing this, I was doing the corners backwards. And maybe it's because I'm left-handed, but once I got the corners right and I had the corners going in the direction I was sewing, then they turned out really, really nice. Okay, so I think I've got this pinned enough. I may not pin up here. That I don't really need to. I can stick a, if you need to put clips in, you can. You can put I might put another clip here. Sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. All right. You can put a clip on each side here. Okay. So the trick with this binding with the machine is you want to have matchy thread. And I had a really nice dark brown that was almost the exact color of my binding. If you do not have, so like the other wall hanging, let me grab this one up here so you can see it. The other wall hanging, you know, with the little leaves that I did. This is the other one. This one I didn't have, there's so many colors in it, I didn't have a good color that looked like it wouldn't show. So the trick is to, you know, try not to make it show. So what I used with this one was monofilament. And I do use monofilament, although it sometimes shows too, but on this multicolored fabric, that monofilament was the best choice. But this one I had a really beautiful dark brown that matched. So the trick is get yourself as close as you can possibly get, and it actually shows less if it's the color of the fabric, okay? And not monofilament. But there's times when I have to use it because I have so many colors in my binding. If you have, like this was the leaves and there were so many colors in it. So this one we're going to use the brown. Now I like to start on a straightaway, not in a corner, because then I have trouble getting around the corners sometimes. But we want to start on the straightaway. I am going to use a zigzag stitch for this. And I like to use a fairly narrow one. My favorite one is actually on the standard tab, which is the number 1 tab. And I like to use 1-10 is my favorite one for zigzag. And I put the length and the size that I like to use. I used to use a shorter stitch, but I've started using a little bit longer one because then there's not so many zigzags, especially when I'm doing these little tiny things. There was just so many zigzags, and I like it to be about 2 millimeters wide. If I go into retrieve here, you might see what I used to use was 2 and 1, and there was just too many zigzags, so I bumped up the length a little bit to 1.4, and that seems to work really well. And then 2.0 is a nice length, or a nice width. And that's how you save them in your machine, by the way, is you set up the sizes that you want, and then you hit this memory button. And then the last one that you saved will always come up every time you hit that particular stitch. If you need to retrieve a different one, you hit the retrieve button, and you can save up to 5 options for every stitch. So see, I do have a couple of options here. Like number 2 is the one that I use for the jelly roll rugs. I use 5.5 and 2. And then this one here, I'm ready to get rid of it actually because I don't use that one anymore. I use this one. So if I touch that, and if you look down at the bottom here, I can make it blue, and then see there's a delete button. I can hit delete and OK. And now I only have 2 there, and those are the 2 that I use on that particular this particular stitch. So I'm going to grab the one that I want for the binding here. It's 2 and 1.4. All right, 2 and 1.4. Okay, so I'm going to try to get as close as I can. I have to be able to see what I'm doing also when I do this. So I have to put my glasses on, especially since it's dark. I'm going to get the pins out of the way here. And the trick with the binding is to bring your binding just up to the line of stitching. And you probably can't see it, but I'm bringing it up just to that line of stitching, which is right here, the folded edge. I'm going to put my foot down on here. I'm using the J foot, and the reason I like the J foot is I can see, let me see if I can move this up just a little bit. I can see there's a little notch in the middle of it, and I can see what I'm doing. I feel it works better than using an open toe foot. I've tried the open toe foot, and sometimes it doesn't track as straight. I think it's because it's got that big opening in the middle. They also have a new foot now that is like a bi-level foot that's made for binding, and I'm actually going to get one of those and try it because I think it would work really well. So what I'm doing is I brought this binding, and that's why I don't clip it. I'll take the clips out as I go. But I like to bring that folded edge right just up to the stitching line, my 1/4 inch line that I made. And I want the outside, the left-hand zig, to be just off the binding, and I want the right-hand one to be on the binding. And that's how you hit the back. So I'm going to bring my needle down. I'm going to tie a knot here. And I've got this little line right here just on the edge, the folded edge of the binding. And I'm going to line my binding up with that line. And the trick is to zig just to the left of the fold and zag on the binding, and that way you'll hit your backing. So I've got my fabric just to the stitching line. So hopefully you can see me. It's a little hard with the camera because I have to get my hands in here, because when I do binding, you actually have to pay quite a lot of attention, especially when it's dark like this. Okay, and take this one out, but I want to leave these pins in the center. I'm going to bring that fabric just up to the line, and I've got one stitch off the left, and then the rest of it's on the binding. And that's why you want your thread to be very, very matchy-matchy. I learned to do this on a baby quilt. I had black binding and black thread, and I just thought, well, how can I make this be perfect and I don't have to hand stitch all this binding for this baby, because they're going to wash those quilts. And it looks pretty good. I'm getting a little caught on my embroidery unit. Okay. So then when I get to this point, you can see I'm down here at the corner. I might have to pull back a little bit to make that binding lay flat for me. And I'm going to go up to the corner. And I'm still a little bit weak on my corners. Okay, so I'm going to drop the needle. I took about 2 stitches into the next side. I'm going to flip this around. I've got my pivot feature on. I'm going to leave that pin in there. I want to make sure my binding is on that stitching line. And I'm going to put the foot down though, because I can see that I'm a little bit too far this way. So I'm going to raise my needle. I'm going to reposition this slightly and bring my needle back down, because I want to make sure that I'm all right in the corner, and I have to reposition myself often. So I've got this coming down the other side, doing the same thing. I've got 1 stitch off the left, and the rest of it's on the binding. So go around the corner here, down the side. Now I'll probably just run the camera while I'm doing this so you can watch me do this. And you can see I'm just holding the binding. I don't usually clip it. I just, I unclip as I go, just to kind of get it in the right spot. Now here you can probably see the line really well because it's on the white. I'm bringing the binding, the folded edge of the binding, just right to that stitching line, and the needle is just dropping just inside the fabric, and the other side is on the binding, and that's how I hit the backing. But that's why you want that beautiful crease on the back when you iron it out, because then you can hit the binding. And the trick is, you don't want to see the stitches on either side. I really think that new foot might work. I think it's a baby lock foot, and it's like a bi-level foot that goes on the edge. I've never had any trouble with my J foot. I've been doing this for a long time now. I really like doing binding this way because I just don't like to have to hand stitch anything. I still hand stitch if I'm making like a quilt for a gift, something that is going to be a really nice gift. But this, little things like this is so much faster to do it. Okay, so I'll bring that right up to the stitching. And of course you want to make sure that when you've sewn your binding on that you're getting a nice, a nice 1/4 inch seam. I do use a full 1/4 inch seam though. Okay, get that right up to my line. Okay, I'm getting down towards the end here. Now, this one's just a little off, so I'm going to have to take my finger and I'm just pulling back a little bit to get my line lined up. Line up that binding. I'm going to leave that pin in there though. And go right down to the corner. Okay, I think I need to take one more stitch. There we go. Okay, I'm going to turn the corner and see how I did. Now see, I'm a little too, shouldn't have taken that last stitch, but that's okay. We can realign it. So I'm going to get my binding where I want it. I'm going to raise my foot. And I think I just need to come back this way just a hair. Line up my line with my binding. But yeah, I've learned that I use matchy thread, and the monofilament is sometimes what I have to use, but I try to use the same color as my fabric because it really does look pretty good that way. Now the center of that little chevron is right down here. I'm going to actually mark that with a pin if I can find my pins. Oh, my cat has her head laying on them. Cats are out here helping me. So I'm just going to make a mark. I'm just going to put this pin here so I know where that center is. Alright, so I got to get this line back up to my sewing line. And I'm taking one stitch off the fabric and the other stitch is on my binding. And it's very narrow. Now I've tried, there's some people that do this with a much narrower stitch, and I just can't do it. I've tried doing it with something less than 2 and I cannot hit it. So some people use a very narrow stitch and even narrower, and I just can't hit it. So 2 is about as small as I can do this. Alright, so get that lined up, and I'm just about to that little tiny corner, and it's so smooth that I hardly have to do, but I'm going to kind of stop right at my pin and kind of turn it then, so it gives me that illusion of having that little turn. It's very slight. There we go. Hopefully you're able to see what I'm doing. It's pretty close. Okay. We'll do one more corner, and then what I'll do is I'll turn the camera off while I finish this up so you can see what it looks like. So you don't have to watch me do the whole thing, because it does take a little bit. Even with, when you're doing this by machine, it takes a little bit to do this, because, it's, and especially if it's dark and you have to kind of really concentrate. I don't want to do binding when I'm tired because I have to really concentrate to do it. So, alright, we'll do one more corner here. I'm coming up on the corner. I'm kind of pulled out again just to keep it flat. Trying to keep my stitches, okay. And then we're going to turn the corner. I think I went a little bit too far again, so we may have to pull this back. Let's see here. Yep, gonna have to lift that needle and come back this way just a little. I always seem to take about 1 extra stitch for some reason, so there we go, that looks better. And around the corner. 1 stitch off on the fabric, and the rest of it is, let's get this out of here. Alright, so I'm going to turn the camera off for a few minutes while I finish this up, and then we'll come back when we're all done, and I'll show you how to put the little leaves on. We're almost done. So I'll turn it off for just a second until we get around to the other end. I'll show you how I end it, and then I'll show you how to put the leaves on. Okay, so I've rounded the last corner here. One thing I did do is I put a pin where we started so I can see. I don't like to zigzag over the other zigzags if I can help it, but I usually take about a stitch or so over. So I put a pin here so I know where I'm at. I'm going to get this last little bit done here so we can end this. Got to get this adjusted a little bit more. And I've done a couple larger quilts this way. It really does work. I mean, this is great, especially if it's like a baby quilt, or if you you know, you're doing table runners or placemats, small things that you know you're going to get washed a lot. This is a little bit stronger. You know your binding's not going to, you know, the stitching's not going to come loose or anything. So I do like to use this for baby quilts too. All right, getting just about to the pin, and I'm just going to take a stitch or so over the pin. I don't like to travel over those zigs too much. I'm going to tie this off like I did at the beginning and use my cutter. And I think we're all the way around. So let's see how we did here. We'll take a look at it. I got to take some of these pins out. So when I look at my corners, this is the one thing I'm still struggling a little bit with. My corner's pretty good. Let's see if the camera will focus for you. My corner's pretty nice. Okay. I'm going to take the pins out of the corners. So the corners look pretty nice. Let me get all these pins out so I won't stab myself. Oh, I got a little thread here. We'll trim this. And I do pretty well now. I'm getting to the point that I'm doing much better with this. All right. And then let's do this corner. So the corners look pretty nice. Okay. Then when I turn it over, hopefully we did well on the back, because what you want to do is you want to see the stitches just on the edge of the binding and not off on your wall hanging. So I think I did pretty well. Looks pretty good. This is the back. Okay. And sometimes my corners are not perfect, but I'm doing much better with my corners. I think the back corners look nice too. And I think we're ready to... That looks pretty good. So here's one of the bottom corners. So I think it looks pretty good. That's the back. So I think we're ready to put the leaves on. I forgot to tell you about the leaves yesterday, so we'll talk about the leaves a little bit too. Give me a second. I'm going to pause the video for a second. I have to go get my glue gun because we're going to put the leaves on with the glue gun. Okay, now I normally don't use the glue gun around my sewing machine, but I don't have anything else set up so that we can do this. So I think this will be okay. I just have a few little leaves to put on, and these are the ones that we made double-sided, and then we used the water-soluble stabilizer, and then you rinsed it out, and then they're a little bit stiffer now. So they're mine are flat. I did pin mine down like I've shown you with my lace before, and then I'll just kind of lift them up once I get them glued down. So what I'm going to do is I got my picture here, the picture of the design, so I can kind of see where I want to put these leaves, and I'm just going to take my glue gun. And I'm going to put the glue on the leaf. It seems to work better for me. Just put a little glue on just like at the base of the leaf here. And then I'm going to look at my picture and I'm going to place it on the design, kind of like the picture, and push it down and let it cure on there. Then let's move over here to this other one. So this one we're going to put kind of over in here. It's kind of tipped up like that. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to get my glue gun, put a dot of glue at the base of the leaf, and I'm not gluing the whole thing. I just want a base on there because that way it can be three-dimensional when we get done here. So I'm going to press it down and let it cure. Looks pretty good. And then we're going to move over here to this third one. Let's do this one. I'm looking at the picture. Gigi's been sitting next to me and she doesn't like the glue gun. It's kind of warm. She put her nose down toward it. Must have been too warm for her, so she just left. And this is going to be more this angle, like that. Press it down. You always have glue gun strings everywhere. And then I'm going to do this top one. This one needs to be kind of in here. I don't want it to cover up like any of my words up here, so I'll have to be a little careful when we get it angled correctly. Put a dot of glue on here. And then we want it to go, I think we want it to kind of go like this. We don't want it to hit any words, so that looks pretty good. Got a little bit of glue peeking out there, so I'm going to grab it before it gets hard. I always have to clean off all the hot glue strings. And then once I've got them cured, so let's go down here, then I can go ahead and kind of take my leaves and kind of fluff them up a little bit so they stick up just a little bit. That's why you don't want to glue more than just that base, so that you can do this so that they kind of stick up a little bit. Give it that three-dimensional look. And we have completed our first wall hanging, and I have one more to do. I'll take a picture of both of them when I get them done, but let me hold this up so you can see it. So I'm actually pretty happy with that. So this is the one that I quilted last night, and there's the leaves, and it's all the binding is on, and here's the little sleeve that we can hang it with. So I hope you enjoyed this project. It was a really fun one to do. I'd never done any of these. I think I'm definitely going to do some more of these, and do some of the Christmas ones, I think, and some of the other seasons. So if you have any questions, message me through Facebook or give me a call at the store, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you, everybody.